I just had a really funny thought that Amazon's Nova was like the Amazon basics of LLMs. Like Amazon, like it just kind of came to me, and I was like, "Is this what we're dealing with? We're doing Amazon basics of language models, like that. That's
You,
kind of
you,
a hilarious concept."
I don't know. Maybe is that
because
I
because it's like it's what you need. It's good enough. It doesn't have any of this branding on it. It's fairy dust, but like if you need an LLM to just do LLM things, it's there. But if you want the thing that maybe will kill you in your sleep, yeah, you can go buy the Anthropic, but we're going to give you the Amazon Basic. Actually, now that pisses me off. They should have named it Amazon Basic LLM.
we've been doing a lot of technical episodes lately, and I thought it'd be nice to get a different perspective from somebody I know, because a lot of the people I've interviewed lately I don't actually know all that well. So it's nice to be able to talk to somebody who I know a little bit better. And that person is,
Brennan Woodruff. I am the
wow,
co-founder and
that's
COO of GoCharlie. Previously, I've worked at some interesting places. Started my career in Chicago at KPMG in their deal advisory group. And then I took a very long Uber X from New York out to San Francisco, joined Uber in 2018, Boo Lyft, Daniel. And I was there for a couple years, helped them IPO, worked on bikes, scooters, self-flying, self-driving, in the global rides business. And then went to go work for someone that's back in the news now, Masayoshi's son, on Vision Funds 1 and 2. I did that for 2 years, and I've spent the last 3 years building a generative AI startup called GoCharlie. We build small language models. But yeah, that's a bit about me. So I've seen AI from all sorts of different recent ways that we've liked to paint it in the market.
you didn't actually take an Uber X all the way across the country, did you?
No,
Well,
it's
because
usually funnier when I tell that story, but I see people that have taken Ubers from like Buffalo to New York. I
when
didn't
I was about to
know you could do
say,
that.
I think the record at Lyft is somebody had taken one that was over 2,000 miles.
I thought you couldn't take it outside of state lines. So like, are they adding stops? Like,
This was back in the early days when it was still kind of a bit of a regulatory free for all. So I seem to recall there somebody at Lyft, and I could be misremembering this, but I seem to recall there was one that I think somebody was on the East Coast. Somebody went like all the way from Florida to New York or something along those lines. But
I did not
uh,
actually take that Uber. Just to be clear, yeah, we
well,
legally
man,
did not take it. I flew there. I flew.
one of the things, and I wonder if you have a similar experiences. So yes, Brennan was at Uber, and I know I was at Lyft. And one of the things I find so interesting is that I think most people would think that there would be a very contentious rivalry between people that were at those two companies. And I always find it's the exact opposite. There's this camaraderie of this shared experience, having gone through this same chaotic category creation with everybody I've ever met at Uber, because even though they are different companies, different cultures, we were kind of going through the same thing in in a lot of ways and trying to solve the problems and maybe slightly different approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that I think Travis really fueled the rivalry, and I think he understood the. It's kind of like the Arnold Schwarzenegger documentary. I recently watched that. It's like you understand the power of creating a villain, like a villain for yourself
Mm.
to push yourself, and a villain to push your team. Like I've even used that tactic with our own company. Is like, hey, these people are like killing it, and I'm going to position them as like they're talking crap about your mom, So that you're like, well, my mom's awesome. Why are they talking crap about my mom? And then you'll like go to the next level. You use that anger to fuel. Like now you can't use that all the time. But I think that's kind of what Travis sort of did with Lyft, and that created some animosity. But I think after Travis was kind of gone and Dara was back in, it was, is rideshare even an economically viable business at scale? And God, please let it be, because all of my future plans are based off of the equity of this doing well. And like, you know, both have struggled since IPO. Uber is giving back all the gains that it made this year with self-driving on the horizon. So I think largely like it is that, like there was some rivalry, but it's like you meet someone and you can talk the same language, right? You can like it's kind of like I started my career in finance, and if I had spent enough time with a certain industry, I was always more comfortable talking to people that were in that industry. So I think the rivalry's kind of faded now that I'm a couple years out, but I think it was just a way to fan the flames of motivation.
That's such an interesting perspective because I never felt at Lyft that they had leveraged that sort of thinking at all. I mean, we obviously looked at Uber as being, well, Uber is the market leader, obviously, but I don't think we villainized them really. I think we tried to be, I mean, Lyft was always trying to be, I guess, the nice one because I mean, Lyft was much better at marketing. There's no question about that. You know, they
Yeah.
were. I look back at some of the marketing stuff from like that 2016 to 2017 period, and I go, "Wow, this is some amazing marketing." And then by 2018, they kind of stopped those campaigns, and I don't really know why. Um, but
Yeah.
there was some really great stuff in those early days. I mean, they had some really great marketing people. But no, I never really felt that we villainized Lyft. I mean, excuse me, villainized Uber. A good example of that was there were these OWASP meetups that happened in the cybersecurity space,
Yeah.
and Uber hosted one, and four of us from Lyft went to it, and we were a little bit worried that we would not be well received. So we came up with all these cover stories of where we lived. I think I was supposed to work for Salesforce, and everybody else had these other covers of where they worked at. And it turns out nobody cared. I don't even know that anybody from Uber was there, actually, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, um, and we ended up hosting the next one at Lyft at the Lyft office, and we made it very we were very open about all are invited, even no matter what company you come from. Is a little bit of a joke, but that's kind of about as far as we went with that. But um, well, that's an interesting point about villainizing trying to villainize somebody to even give yourself a target. And in the AI space, um, it's such an ambiguous space where day to day, I'm not sure how to categorize even the big foundation model players, let alone the other people in the space. Like, where did who are you even looking at as to say, that's who we're going after?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We in July 2021, when we were first trying to raise for this company, and the whole pitch was we're going to build LLMs for enterprises. No one had any clue what an LLM was. GPT-3 was available to select folks via API.
I was about to say yeah, that's pre GPT-3 release, right?
Yeah, it was very limited availability. So like we had access to it. The Jaspers of the world had access to it. The
Yeah.
copy.ais of the world. That's why all the original like Gen AI darlings were copy companies, like because that's all GPT-3 could do, is write really good copy because it was trained on SEO style content. But like what's interesting about these foundational model providers in my mind is like it's not so different than the Uber Lyft game when you start to think about it, because I think that a lot of the interesting marketing that was happening at Uber and Lyft in the early days was a byproduct of, we are in a behavior changing phase. We're in a, how do we convince people that instead of owning a car, they should just call cars? and how do we get that behavior change to happen? And so when you're trying to change behavior, you have to invest a lot more to acquire customers. You have to invest a lot more to change customer behavior. And I completely agree. Like there used to be Uber ice cream trucks, there was Uber puppy, there was all these things that they did that were so interesting, had so much virality. Like if TikTok would have existed back then, would have been insane. You had like Uber delivering dogs. And a lot of that fun stuff has gone away as they've started to be a lot more rational about unit economics. But that largely was a byproduct of, hey, we've already changed behavior now. And we're now starting to feel like this has become a commodity. It's kind of like air flight, right? Like you had to convince people to fly in airplanes. So you're going to make this luxury experience. And then once people are all feeling safe and secure about flying in an airline, it all becomes about unit economics and making it a very shitty experience, excuse my French. And so I think you're kind of seeing that with AI, right? Like I think a lot of these foundational model providers invested all this capital up front, and they're offering products at like this very subsidized rate. And they're doing very interesting marketing collaborations, data collaborations. They're making the API super cheap because they're still in that data gathering and behavior changing stage. And I think you start to look a few years out, even like the leaked OpenAI projections, and you start to get into, oh shit, they're going to increase prices on this by 10-fold, maybe even 20-fold. And they no longer need the data, and they've already got people that are depending on it for everything they're doing for work. So they're going to pay whatever it costs, because at the end of the day, still cheaper than paying someone to be an employee or paying someone to work under you. And so that kind of funnels me into, well, who are we looking at, right? And I think you're starting to see this emergence of like weight classes almost in AI, where it's like you have the big foundational Silicon Valley players, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, and then traditional big tech. AWS is releasing Nova, Google's releasing Gemini and just crushing people. The incumbents are fighting back towards the end of 24. I don't think any startup can reasonably play in that weight class. It's just not going to happen. I think it's been written off. If you're trying to build foundational models, unless it's something super niche, which then it's not a foundational model to me, you're not going to play in that game. So then I think you're really, where the competition is going to happen is going to be at the point solution layer. So you're basically going to have AI agents now for every single type of job, with access to all the necessary information, the textbooks that they learned in college, the employee handbook, the operational process, and the SOP documentation. And then you're going to give them access to the raw data that's coming in. And so I think we are positioning a little bit closer to a writer.com, where it's like we build the models, but we're not building like an AGI model. We're building a model that's specific to all the things that you do. And then we're building an app interface so it's really easy for people to use it. But if you prefer to integrate it into a solution, you have an API. So I still think that any player in this AI space needs to have that optionality for them to have like a unicorn style potential. So that was a long way to get to that answer, but hopefully kind of shows the arc.
Well, no, it makes me want. It basically spurred a lot of thoughts in my mind, and talking about the VC subsidization. Boy, did we see that? That is something that we absolutely saw at Uber and Lyft. Is, if you remember, if anybody out there remembers, if you were taking Uber or Lyft in 2016 and 2017, you probably never paid more than $5 or $6 for a ride, and then even if you were, you had coupons because they were couponing each other. That was their customer acquisition strategy, was send out coupons. So you almost never took an Uber or Lyft during that time period where you didn't have 50% off or ride 2 times, get 1 free. There was always some sort of financial incentive because they were well capitalized, and they, to your point, they're not actually trying to make money off of this yet. They're just trying to grow and grow and grow. And
Yeah.
that's getting overlooked a lot in the AI space, is that a lot of these big foundation model providers, even though they are starting to charge now, it's a very similar situation in which they're very well capitalized, especially if you're Google or AWS or Microsoft, and they can afford to, again, it's kind of the illicit drugs model. You give that first hit for free and get people hooked, and then once they can't live without your product, the prices just ratchet up, ratchet up, ratchet up, ratchet up. And what you're talking about as being a startup in the weight classes, how do people that want to compete in this space survive when you have these heavyweights that are so well capitalized that can use these AI products as a loss leader?
Yeah, it's honestly a question that we've thought about quite a bit. And I think the unfortunate nature of the time in which you and I have come through tech, like we are basically dealing with a reckoning of a bull run, followed by a bear run, followed by a manipulated market bull run, and that has just created some havoc on the VC fund side. But I'll save that discussion for a little bit later. But if I'm a startup starting right now, I think I'm building at the app layer, but I'm building with the knowledge that if what I am building is not significant, if there's not a significant gap between the functionality that like foundational model that I'm building on top of, or open source model that I'm calling on an API, if there's not a significant gap from what the functionality of that is to like the product experience I'm delivering to a customer, I'm just right off the bat not going to be a venture scalable startup. That's not to say that you can't eventually grow into one, but I think if that's kind of your vision, it's going to be really, really hard to be viewed as venture backable. And there's even some people that say that you need to have a purpose-built LLM for them to feel like you can be a generational company. I think we've yet to see what the answer is there, but I do think I would be building in a problem set I'm familiar with, where I already have a network built, and I would be focusing on, if there's consultants in the industry that I'm building for, I would be very, very keen to understand what their process is, and then build that into a bunch of different LLM calls and like clever UI. So a lot of people will call that agentic workflows. I would just call it more like results as a service is a popular name for it. Service as a software is another kind of way to think about it. You're starting to see it with like the Sierra.ai's of the world, but not everybody has Brett Taylor and $130 million coming out of the gate. But I think you're going to see a lot of software kind of fade away into the agent layer. And instead of it being like a static UI that we're always logging into and looking at, it's just going to be an AI running long horizon tasks with no UI. So I said a lot of words there, but I think if I sum it up, I'm going after a very specific market, because the foundational model providers will build vertical solutions. It's happening. They're already hiring for it, but they're not going to be able to go to the niche depth that you can. And there are a lot of niches that have a lot of depth and a lot of money hiding in them. I'm building for a market that I know, or I have a network in. And then I'm being very, very, very clear-eyed about the value it is that I'm delivering to the customer, and making sure that that's not entirely, but pretty far decoupled from the base LLM kind of value that you get out of just using an LLM call versus what I'm delivering as a product.
Hey, I totally hear what you're saying, but I
Yeah,
also think and I'm sure you've had these conversations with VCs is the same as I've had, is that makes a lot of sense to me, but then they'll hit you with the question of, well, how does this, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense as a go-to-market, but then if you're going to focus on this niche, how does this become a 100 million ARR company? And I think, to your point, you would say that once you have that fraction in one niche, then there's potentially opportunities to move into others, to apply your solution to other verticals. But I've never found that answer to be satisfying to any of the VCs that have ever asked me
yeah.
that question. So what is the magic answer to that? I don't think it's even a fair question to even ask, but it is what it is. You get asked that question. So what is that magic answer that somebody's wanting when they ask that question?
Yeah, so I have two answers. I have a short one, and then I have a long one that you're gonna really enjoy. So the short answer is traction, plain and simple. Revenue traction, revenue in the door. You're already successful. The market's already validating that what you're solving is a real problem. And you say, look, I think there's enough money in this niche and niche adjacent things that I can make tons of money before I ever have to go outside of this niche. That's, I think, the best response, because you have market validation. You've proven that there's a problem. You've proven that you can discover those problems and build solutions that people will pay you for. And you've proven that you've thought about all the different adjacencies that you could start to make money off of in that particular network. Some ways that you could maybe flip that niche idea is you could say, okay, yeah, right now we're building for marketing agencies, but once we get enough marketing agencies on the platform, we're going to turn it into a platform where AI-enabled agencies can actually meet customers, or their clients can actually log into the platform and have agencies kind of work as a Fiverr or Upwork. So you use your initial customer base to create a platform that people want to have access to. Another is you can create different revenue streams, affiliate partner programs off of that first solution that you have. There's so many different ways to monetize once you have a niche. And this is why a lot of people that are podcasters, they're podcasters first. They get familiar with an industry, and then they get into that industry with some sort of product. Like it's not rocket
I wish
science.
I wish I was that smart.
Yeah, I mean the Harry Stebbings from 20-Minute VC, I love that guy's stuff. I was listening to that back in like 2017, 2018, and back then he wasn't making significant money, but he was getting great investors on there. And now he runs his own venture fund and is one of the only reputable venture funds in Europe and in the UK that's actually
Mm.
making pretty substantial investments in growing. So I mean, that all gets back to like a build a well before you're thirsty. But to your question of like how to answer the VC question, I think it's doing the homework before you go after that niche to know that there's a big enough market there, and revalidating that the market's already paying you, that you know that market, and you know that there's more opportunities within that market. The longer answer, which that ended up being longer than I thought, but
I was going
longer.
to say that was the short answer. How much time do I need to block away from this? Do I need to
Yeah,
make some more
yeah,
tea?
well, the longer answer comes with a fun story you're going to enjoy, which is when I was a kid, I went to this wonderful place that was a couple hours drive from my hometown, called Holiday World, and
Is this because I told you I'd been there?
well, yeah, that's why you're going to like this story. So because
Okay.
I think I've used this story many
You
times.
drank too much free soda and you got sick. Let me guess.
I was a fat kid, man. Don't fat shame a child. That's not cool.
Say that. I
Um,
said you drank too much soda
what do you
because it's
think
like
you have to vote soda? So
for anybody that
all right.
hasn't been. So wait. We need to explain Holiday World. It's all
Okay,
okay. Yeah,
so
you do need to explain this for people.
Holiday World is this magical place in Indiana, in a
Not the
city
word I
called,
would use to describe it.
yeah, Santa Claus, Indiana. It is
That is
literally named
true.
Santa
True.
Claus, Indiana.
It's true. It is true.
Yes. And this place is like Disney World in the middle of nowhere. You have a water park, you have a theme park, you have all sorts of games, but God forbid that's not enough. You have unlimited soda on tap wherever you want. You have all sorts of food markets, especially charming during the holidays, but the water park's not open during that time. They have live shows, live performances, and they have tons of rides. But every year, they had the number one wooden roller coaster in the
Hmm.
world. In the world.
Yeah,
And
I remember that. That's one
as
of the
a
reasons I went.
kid, I was so scared of roller coasters, but I finally got on them. And I always come back to that marketing concept when I was an adult, because I was like, well, how is this small place in Santa Claus, Indiana, the number one wooden roller coaster in the world every year? And part of me is like, they're probably blowing smoke up my ass. But I dove into it one time because I was curious. And the answer is because no one is building wooden roller coasters. And the startup lesson in there is you find your wooden roller coaster and you pump that for all it's worth. This place brings people in from all over the country because they have the number one wooden roller coaster. And so when people are like, well, don't niche down, it's not a big enough market, you can make a ton of money in a niche. Find your wooden roller coaster And then you can expand out to all the free drinks and the Christmas markets and all the games. Find that one thing that's going to bring people in from wherever, and then expand back out.
What's so funny is that that's exactly why I went. I used to, when I was, excuse me, when I was like a teenager and in college, I was really into roller coasters and actually used to go to Cedar Point and Sandusky, Ohio, which that's the only reason you would ever go to Sandusky, Ohio, is if you were really into roller coasters. And you're actually right that during that time period, all the amusement parks were obsessed with faster and taller. So
Yeah.
so they were investing huge amounts of money. Like every year they had to build a roller coaster that was taller than the one that was built last year. And wooden roller coasters don't fit that paradigm. There are limits. Well, I guess there was a park in Ohio that actually they tried to create this coaster. It was they had this old coaster called the Beast, if I remember correctly, and they created one called Son of Beast that even had a loop and it was hyper fast. And they basically inadvertently proved that wooden roller coasters have severe limitations, that once they start going too fast, they become really bumpy and really uncomfortable. And because of that, that didn't fit the paradigm of the marketing that you're talking about. We now have the world's tallest roller coaster. We have the world's fastest roller coaster. But people weren't building wooden
Yeah.
roller coasters, except Holiday World did. And not only that, I think was the didn't they name the coasters actually after like Edgar Allan Poe stories? Was the one called The
The
Raven or
Raven.
something?
The Raven.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's classic. They shut that
And
one down after it decapitated someone.
I do remember that actually. Well, hey, my understanding was that individual took off their lap belt and stood up. So it
Yes.
is anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Holiday World needs
caveat
to
emptor.
sponsor this episode, by the way.
Yeah.
You can go back for free. We'll do a video episode. We'll do a live podcast there. But it's so
All
fascinating,
the
isn't
so
it?
we
Like,
can.
so many business lessons can be learned from this random theme park in middle of nowhere. But the
Well, it is in the
problem I
middle of
think a
nowhere
lot of
too. There's no
startups
question
have,
about it.
like a problem with a lot of startups that I see now is like they think they have their wooden roller coaster, but they don't realize there's 400 other people with that same wooden roller coaster.
Yeah.
So maybe your wooden
Well,
roller
this
coaster is polished or it's made of cedar or like something, but like you got to figure out that one thing, that one very narrow thing that you're going to be known for to start, and then you can go out.
I've actually been talking about this a lot lately because I talked about this, and I think the episode I did with Rick Borden is that Mr. Beast had actually done an interview with Theo Vaughn, and they started talking about promotion a little bit. And basically, this is the same exact concept as what Mr. Beast said: is that you have to find your purple cow. And Theo Vaughn was kind of like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, if you drive down the road and you see a cow on the side of the road, you're going to go like, oh, hey, there's a cow,' and you're going to turn and you're going to keep driving. But if you're driving down the road and you see a purple cow, you're going to go like, hey, wait, what? You're probably
Yeah.
going to stop. You're going to stop." And
Yeah.
Mr. Beast's point was, I mean, he didn't exactly say it this way, but it's pretty much implied, is that you you don't have to like it, but this is the world we live in now. The amount of content that is immediately available to anyone at any time, that you can't just be a cow standing by the side of the road. You know, you have to be a purple cow. And to your point, if you're in the amusement park industry and everybody's building these metal roller coasters that are faster, taller than the next one, you can't compete in that game. You have to go a different direction. And, you know, kind of to bring that back to, you know, what we're doing, you know, last year, we started looking into doing graph rag. I think graph rag in 2023 was a little bit of a purple cow. As we're nearing the end of 2024, it's just a cow. Everybody's
Yeah.
doing it. Everybody's doing it. And that's not to say everybody's doing it well, but being able to differentiate yourself between something that maybe somebody does well and maybe not so well, I that does not seem to me to be a viable way to grow a company, not country. I'm not in the country creating business. Although I hear it's good money.
Yeah. I mean, we had a demo night for Gen AI Collective in Chicago last night, and someone was like, they claimed they were in stealth still, and they like pitched about knowledge graphs and what the value of knowledge graphs were, and
Wait,
everybody.
I know a guy in Chicago that's doing knowledge graphs. Is it him?
Does their name start with a W or a C?
I'd have to look at my LinkedIn. I don't remember, but I know they were in stealth because he messaged
Okay.
me on LinkedIn. He's like, I'd love to pick your brain. And I noticed like that he kept saying that they were in stealth. And I'm like, there are so many people doing graph rag and doing knowledge graphs right now. I literally just did a podcast with the CTO of FalconDB an hour ago. I don't know when we're gonna. Actually, I shouldn't say that because I don't know when we're going to debut this. I did an episode with the CTO of FalconDB where we talked about all this stuff. Um, there's so many people doing this. Sorry, I interrupted. What was you
No,
were
no
going to
worries.
tell me an anecdote that it would have been entertaining? I'm sure.
Well, we should figure out if we know the same person, but I definitely, for me, they try, they're like, yeah, it's really hard to demo a vector database. It's really hard to demo a database solution. I was like, yeah, it is. But the harder part is, how do you describe the value that you're providing versus like the 12 other knowledge graph startups that I've met over the last couple of weeks? And that gets back to like, you have to know your market for you to know if you're the number one wooden roller coaster. And I think knowledge graphs are a really good generalized solution, but I think like I I don't want to give just the wooden roller coaster advice, because then you can end up in like rabbit R1 land where you're like, yeah, we're the first of these cool devices and we can do all this stuff. And then it's like, no, you actually can't do any of that. You just oversold it and you made it sound like you were the number one wooden roller coaster. But I do think that there's ways that you can create categories. I think category creation is kind of the other path, other than like niching down, is you can say, look, there's now this knowledge graph industry, and people are agreeing that there's value within it. But you know, the number one thing that we're hearing about knowledge graphs is like, we needed to have domain specific information that we may not have as a company, but we want it right out of the box. And so then you can start saying, we're going to be the first knowledge graph specifically for case law, or specifically for regulation around deforestation, or specifically around accounting, it's accounting standards codification, whatever you want that to be, where you're like, hey, you don't have to build the knowledge graph because we already have all the information gathered. We've already done that. It's not so different from like domain specific LLMs, but just different architectures. But it's kind of one of those things where you're still niching down, but you might be creating a category. Or you could just say, hey, we're not making knowledge graphs, we're making a operating manual for the AI operating system of your company, and rebrand knowledge graph into that. And then you produce a whole bunch of content where you're like, yes, maybe it's knowledge graph is the underlying technology, but you've productized it in a different way that's specific to your company, and you're now positioned as the industry leader. I often think that the biggest venture results come from category creators, not the technology creators. Those are two different things.
No, that's one of the things I actually, you said that to me a few days ago, and that's why even why I wanted to do this. So, by the way, I texted you the
Yeah.
name. Was that who it was?
Yeah, yeah. It was his co-founder presented last night.
And they're still in stealth. Interesting.
They have a website where you can submit things. I think they're further along, but yes.
Um, and you talked about, and you said this was actually something that you saw at Uber was, um, the advantage of being a category creator
Yeah.
versus being, and that's one of the things again to talk about. What's your wooden roller coaster? What's your purple cow? How can you create a category, especially because we are now in such a crowded space, and it's not clear how any of these things differentiate themselves, which is fascinating because I've done multiple interviews with founders of knowledge graph companies, And one of the first things they'll say is that a knowledge graph is really an abstract term. It's just a way of describing how you connect information, and that their product is really just a database system that enables you to utilize this kind of abstract concept, which then you start asking questions. Well, how is this different than other databases, and how is this different than other data lakes and data warehouses? And to the user perspective, they all kind of just blend together. And from a marketing perspective, that's the worst situation to be in, when you have all this competition of things that are sort of similar, and well, actually not sort of similar, conceptually very similar to the user, so that the only way that you can really differentiate them is like these very technical differences that the data engineers understand, but the
Yeah.
executives, the senior managers, who are probably the decision maker when it comes to being a buyer, they don't see those differences.
Yeah. I've run into this problem many times with our own company, because you have the best thinkers, and Steve Jobs says this, but Steve Jobs was also like obsessive. But you always want to work backwards from the experience you want to deliver. And so while a lot of engineers are like, problem solution sounds really stupid, or a lot of founders are like, no, I'm a visionary, I don't have to think about problem solution, that framework is incredibly handy. Because if you know the experience you want to deliver, or you know the problem set that you're looking at, even if you don't have the solution all fleshed out. I talked to a bunch of startups that I advise with the same advice. It's like, who has this problem that you're solving? And some of them can't even articulate what the problem actually is. And that right there is just a red flag. You're dead on arrival at that point. So if you can't figure that out, how are you going to figure out who you need to go talk to learn more about this problem so that you can build a solution? I cannot tell you how many times I have people that want to go build the solution or want to go start coding, and like they haven't thought through who their customer is and how they experience the problem that they want to solve. Now, sometimes people get caught in that paralysis, but like you have to go talk to someone. Like, even if you don't know what problem you want to solve, what you should do is sit down and say, these are the types of customers that I think have money and are the types of people that I would want to have in my network long term, and is a space that I'm curious about learning more. And then you're just kind of willy-nilly going with it. But like, if your point of differentiation is something that is not going to resonate with a buyer, then you are not building anything valuable to that buyer. And this is a very important point with all of these people that have become AI entrepreneurs. What was the first use case that everybody used LLMs for? It was programmatic SEO. Why? Because it delivers value. You can do it at a cost less than what it currently costs to pay for a bunch of ads, which were getting more expensive. All the LLMs were already trained on the data that was used to engineer search algorithms to land on their page. And you can theoretically automate it. It's fairly simple what that process is to do all that. But that's only going to be alive for so long before everybody does the same things. And now, like, you're back at parity because everybody's just got AI SEO tools. And I think the biggest thing that I can say is, like, you got to know your buyer. If you believe that the unique selling point of your product is based in technology or some tweak, one, that tweak better deliver 100% better experience, or you're going to get stuck in the existing solution is good enough. And two, you probably need to be talking to someone that's technical as your customer base. If a prime example of this is our company. We were building language models, and what we found is that marketers don't really care what the underlying model is. They care about the quality of the output, such that they don't have to make edits, therefore saves them time, therefore gets them more revenue. But if we would have started from that, hey, we want to help businesses make more money through organic traffic by creating content at scale, then we can be like, oh, okay, well, then we know, like, here's our performance metric we want to like help improve for that client. Here's what they currently pay for that type of solution if they do it. We know that this is a problem, and then we build the solution back into that. But if you start from the technology, you're just going to get lost and you're going to be a hammer looking for a nail. But it gets back to like, does your customer really care about that technical part, right? Like, I would argue that most users don't care about ChatGPT having memory of them. They don't. Like, most people just want to upload files and have ChatGPT do something for them. I think it's a useless kind of thing, but for some reason people think it's a differentiator. And
Yeah.
I just don't think it matters to the average person.
No, I had a very similar conversation recently with somebody who's at a database company, and we were talking about how in that particular niche, there's one company that most everybody knows, and they have the bulk of the market share. And even though their company, has maybe a better product, maybe more performant, I said, how are people coming to you? Are you able to get people to look at your product versus the market leader? And their response was, the only time they really saw that was when the market leader raised their prices and changed their terms. Then people started looking at maybe an alternative. But to your point, otherwise, it was good enough for them. They
Yeah.
it solved their problem well enough that even though there are lots of ways to build it better, those customers just kind of went, it's good enough for us. And that actually takes me back to, you mentioned Steve Jobs. I think that one of my favorite stories of his is when he described the laser printer they developed, and how I remember dot matrix printers. Do you remember? Excuse me. Do you remember dot matrix printers?
No.
No. Wow, man,
No.
you're making me feel old. You don't remember the ones that went line by line, and they had the
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, the you had the perforations on the side, and you had to tear it out,
Yes.
and it was
I didn't know that was the name of them.
yeah, they
Yeah.
were called dot matrix printers. And they when I was growing up, that was that was the predominant kind of printers. They were really slow, they were really loud, and the quality was pretty terrible. And actually, wasn't pretty terrible. It was terrible. You had
Yeah.
everything was just these little segments of lines. And he said, they developed a laser printer, and comparing a laser printer and the output of a dot matrix printer is night and day. And he said, you hold up this piece of paper that came out of this laser printer and said, do you want this? And if you're a room full of people that all they've ever seen is a dot matrix printer, they want it. Yes, give me that. That's so much better. And that's one of the things that I've been really struggling with is in especially in AI, and especially in trying to build AI enterprise solutions. Where is that laser printer moment, or even the iPhone moment when Steve was on stage and he held up the iPhone? Where is that? Where can you hold out something in your hand and people go, gimme, 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 gimme? I want that. You know, is there even opportunity to develop a product like that anymore? Or are we in this stage of technology maturity where we're just the best that we can hope for is being 15% cheaper or faster than somebody else, and that's how we eke out market share?
Yeah. I think cost is your main differentiator is a bad place to be. And increasingly, I feel like it's proven right. I mean, if you look at Lyft and Uber, now that like rideshare feels commoditized in most major cities, you have some price sensitive shoppers, but then you combat that with like an Uber One subscription or a Lyft subscription or credit card partnerships. Like you find other ways to create lock in, but when you become a commoditized industry, then like it's just a race to the bottom, right? Or until all the players like die or get acquired or consolidated. I think in this industry right now, we're still early stages, but you're starting to see like a lot of the LLMs themselves sort of cap out in terms of capability. Some are better at other things and other things, but then like once you get the ability to be kind of similar, then it becomes a cost optimization game. But I think if you're going to go after the enterprise, then you need to be looking for like 100 plus X ROI use cases. You should not be trying to beat OpenAI in an API game or Anthropic that's available via Amazon's Bedrock, because Microsoft is going to push OpenAI models to get you on Azure. Anthropic is going to get pushed by AWS through Bedrock to keep you on AWS. Google has its Gemini suite. So it's all the cloud companies battling to keep you on their cloud, keep access to your data, help increase that cloud bill. But if I'm going after an enterprise, I'm going after something that's specifically built for a certain purpose to do one, maybe two things really incredibly well and can deliver very, very tangible ROI. If you were going into a conversation with an enterprise as a startup and you don't have an idea of how the solution is going to help them or the use cases that you're going to have with them, unless it's been explicitly stated before that this is an exploratory call to like talk about their problems and learn more, which is typically more from friends. Like if you're not prepared going into that call, you're going to get laughed out of the room. You're not going to get a second call. And enterprise sales cycles take a while. So if you cannot impress them and wow them on their first call to where they are actually willing to send a follow-up invite, you're screwed. And you know what does that? It's case studies and it's being able to demo the product in front of them and be like, hey, we did this process for a bank. They found $30 million that was unaccounted for. They found the account that it was in. And so they got $30 million back, all for the price of $10,000 a month. You're going to have a story like that where the ROI is so point blank stupid, then you can sell into the enterprise. But if you're coming in there and you're like, yeah, you'll save like an hour here, an hour there, maybe 3 hours here. Like that's just such a harder sell because then the person that needs to be buying has to be at the cross-functional level, and they're probably not at the executional level where there's those hours are getting saved. So that kind of brings us back to a question I wanted to ask you, which is the true value proposition of AI labor replacement? Because I think increasingly we're starting to see people be like, yeah, it's got to have an ROI. So the ROI is you pay us 10 grand for agents and you can get rid of 50K of headcount expense.
I'm increasingly thinking no. And there's a couple of reasons why. And one was a few hours ago. So we recorded this on the 18th. You might have seen Anthropic just released a paper about, what are they calling it? Actually, I just tweeted about this. Well, actually, I didn't tweet about it. I posted on Blue Sky because I don't even really use Twitter anymore. Alignment faking. And
is that like real? Is that like just crazy marketing to instill fear so you want to buy it or get funded more? Or like, is that actually happening? Like, do we have systems that are actually trying to replicate themselves?
Well, that's not what the alignment faking is. So have you read the paper yet?
I haven't went through the full paper. I thought that the takeaway was like sometimes the models would pretend they were aligned and then they would try to like copy their own weights.
I haven't read it in detail. That wasn't the takeaway I took. Well, so first of all, one of the takeaways I'm taking is I do think there's a little bit of marking going on right now with some of the things I've seen come out of Anthropic lately. For instance, they published a few days ago the best of jailbreaking, where they actually published a tool that showed all these jailbreaking techniques and how simple they are. And I think back to when the Anthropic team were on Lex Friedman's podcast not too long ago. I was surprised how many times Dario said things like, and we don't know why the model did this. And he didn't just say it once, they said it many, many times. And I'm thinking, this is not a way to instill confidence when we have so many people saying, I don't trust AI. I don't think it's people are coming up with all these absurd fear-mongering scenarios. And when the CEO of one of the big foundation model companies says multiple times, we don't know why it does this, I thought, well, that's odd. That seems misaligned with trying to instill confidence in users. And then what do? They publish research showing that you can jailbreak these models with just random capitalization. You start introducing random capitalization, you misspell words, all of a sudden that seems to get you through their safety filters. And then they published today that depending on the scenario, the model might tell you that it's using a safety alignment, but it's actually not for these different reasons. And I thought, well, okay, why would Anthropic do this? Because it seems counterproductive to their own existence, honestly. I mean, if you're trying to sell these AI technology, you want people to trust it. I think they are possibly trying to weigh down the competition by creating this narrative. I don't want to call it a false narrative. I think it's absolutely valid that, hey, wait a minute, we need to pump the brakes on this. These models have problems. And one of the best ways to do that is to not just publish papers, but then you publish a tool that says like, hey, you can use this to jailbreak all these models, and it even jailbreaks ours. And I think, is that maybe a competitive tactic on how to stunt maybe some of the rapid product launches of some of the other players in the space, which is a long-winded way of saying, I don't think we're going to see LLMs replacing people anytime soon. And here's a great reason why. I actually thought
Yeah.
about this a little earlier, because this is also something that we know quite a bit about. We're going to talk about autonomous vehicles here for a second. I look at the airline industry, and most people are totally unaware that totally autonomous commercial air flight dates back to the 1970s. And I'm talking the airplane could take off on its own, fly on its own, and land on its own. And this was happening with commercial air travel and was solved. It was well established. And you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, why aren't we doing that today? It's because they can never solve the problem of people irrationally want a human flying the plane. Even though I can show you mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains of data that will unequivocally prove that you really want the autopilot to fly the plane. You really do. You really do. And this is a problem that the autonomous vehicle industry is going to face too. Is I moved out to Silicon Valley to go to Lyft's L5 division, autonomous
Yeah.
vehicles, from Boston, and I worked with very technical people in Boston, very good engineers. And when I told them what I was coming out to Silicon Valley to do, I had multiple ones tell me, I wish you luck. I will never set foot in an autonomous vehicle. Never. And
Wow.
yeah, they were being serious. And these were mostly people from the aerospace industry who had that experience with safety critical systems and these very complex systems where things can go wrong. And they weren't just joking. That wasn't just a joke. They were serious. I don't trust these. I'm not going to trust these. I have no interest. And that's part of also being in the Silicon Valley bubble, which you've now extricated yourself from, which I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit too,
Yeah.
is that once you do that, you realize that people in the rest of even the country, the rest of the world, are not as bullish on these technologies as we think they are. Matter of fact, there was I think Rick Boren sent it to me last week. There was a study that showed that 52% of people were actually more fearful of AI than excited about it. So I guess this is a really, really, really long way of saying that, we've seen this before where people get really excited about these automated systems. And AI, again, LLMs, it's an automated system, depending on how you're using it. And there was huge amounts of hype. But I think what we're seeing now is that I don't think they're going to replace anybody in totality. Maybe it's going to slightly reduce the number of headcount you might need for some task, but total replacement, I don't see that happening anytime soon, no matter what the big, well, I guess the bulls in the market would be at this point OpenAI and I suppose Google, because Anthropic appears to be the bear in AI right now. When you publish an article like they did today, where they are saying our own models will fake their safety alignment, I don't know how you call them anything other than an AI. I guess that's Are we back to the accelerationist and decelerationist? Because it seems like Anthropic is definitely on the decelerate, pump the brakes.
I don't know, man. I'm pretty jaded. Like I think a lot of this stuff is just fear mongering. I I'm happy to be proven wrong, but knowing what I know about how language models work, how a lot of these other models work, how we still have hallucinations, um, how we still have inaccurate, unreliable outputs. Like knowing all of those things, I'm kind of like, no, I don't think we're getting to AGI anytime soon. And I think more important to the conversation as well is like, if we are close to it, is it really going to change all that much? Like
Mm.
Chesky from Airbnb was like, how many apps on your phone have really changed in the past couple of years since ChatGPT came out? If you're really in the know, you might have Perplexity and ChatGPT. That's it. I have a couple more because like I like to screw around with weird new startup stuff, but I I don't think you're ever going to stop the train. I really don't, because if we really are that close and it's a matter of national security, and the government is kind of stated as much with their support of OpenAI and Palantir and all these other new initiatives, I don't think we're going to decelerate. I think it's only going to keep accelerating from here. You're going to have systems building systems, and then it's just kind of from there.
Well, I mean, well, is that what Anthropic is trying to do? Are they trying to be the forcing function to try to like apply the brakes to the entire industry? Because, and there could be multiple reasons why they could be doing this. Maybe they feel like they're getting left behind by OpenAI. Maybe this is a philosophical. They actually think there's an existential need to decelerate because um, otherwise, I don't otherwise I mean I'm struggling to understand why you do this. It's a perplexing strategy that we've seen from Anthropic now. Executives saying we don't understand what these models are doing. Here's an open source project where we actually show you how to jailbreak our models. Here's a study we did that shows it's actually not adhering to the safety guidelines we gave it. I mean, what other conclusions can we draw from this behavior or from this strategy?
So you worked in L5 at Lyft. Like, why didn't we use LLMs for driving cars?
Well, because those are language models.
Yeah. But would you replace part of the existing tech stack in autonomous vehicles and put an LLM in it?
No.
Exactly. Like, I think right there is kind of one of the answers in a lot of the ways that I've thought about this. Like, it's I think we're another breakthrough away before this happens. Now, maybe OpenAI has figured it out because like GPT-4 came out how long ago, and people have only recently started to surpass it or match it. Like, I think OpenAI is sitting on something, but honestly, if it's a money game, Google is going to destroy everyone. Like they have the data, they have all of the platforms for training data, they have all of the platforms where they could put these products out. I don't see a world where Google doesn't win this in the long run if it becomes a money game.
See, that's okay. So that goes back to something else I wanted to ask you when we were talking about heavyweights, and you talked about how to differentiate yourself in enterprise. And I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of VCs saying the thing that they're really interested in is AI for consumer. And we've been giving a lot of thought to how we position ourselves in an enterprise product. And do you go all in and on this one niche, and hopefully it's a niche deep enough that you can make enough money to survive to then branch out, or or are you dead on with these? There are a couple of heavyweights that are maybe they're not even heavyweights. This is not even super heavyweights. This is a category that even goes beyond that, that have such a stranglehold on data, compute power, resources, and expertise that can they just choke out anybody that really tries to carve out a niche in enterprise AI. And the opportunities are really in something that has that network effect of scalability, like a social media where you can see that network effect. Are
Yeah.
those the opportunities that are left?
Honestly, I don't think any new tech startup can be successful unless one of the big tech companies allows them to be. That's a theory that I hold very strongly. OpenAI was only able to get to the scale that it was because they had Microsoft, and Microsoft had a goal of trying to unseat AWS from the cloud supremacy side, and also to try to shake up Google's stranglehold on search. And Anthropic is only as big as it is because so many people build on AWS, and Anthropic is now available via Bedrock. So you don't have to go through a separate contracting process. You don't have to go through a separate whole procurement cycle. It's already on the AWS marketplace. You've gotten past that. You just literally click a button and it's accessible.
Right. And it's astonishing how many companies you talk to, they say things like, we're an AWS shop, like it's a badge of honor. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Well, in like, think about it this way, like any app that has become a mega company could theoretically be shut off by Apple and Google at any point.
Yeah.
The only way you would be successful is if you play by their rules.
Yeah.
And it's so like I very firmly
we've seen lawsuits about this. We've seen the Epic lawsuit, and who was the one that somebody else was a lawsuit against the App Store for this exact reason.
Yeah. So like I don't think you're getting to venture scale unless you have one of the big tech players. Now, to their credit, a lot of the big tech players have programs for startups to build on them because they will make money off of them, and they're playing nicely. But the longer
I think that's also to avoid trust lawsuits, even though Google is. I really do believe that. I absolutely do, even though Google hasn't done that well enough.
Yeah, I was about to kind of get to that. It's like the longer that we disallow big tech to acquire companies, the more that big tech is just going to start finding ways to grow by copying others' products that have been built on top of their platforms or adjacent to their platforms. Calendly is a perfect example. Calendly was the market leader in scheduling software, but it's a fairly easy software to make, and it's a fairly easy software to make reliable. So Google's like, well, we can't buy Calendly and they're super expensive. How about we just release it where it's integrated with Google Calendar already?
Yeah.
Boom, done. I'm never paying for Calendly ever again. Or you have HubSpot, does it naturally in the CRM. Like some of these companies that were built as products are now features in a larger suite, and in an inflating market, in a depressed market, everybody goes to bundling. And that's the stranglehold. It gets back to, if you're a startup, you're going to have to play nicely with these big players, even if you don't want to, at least to start.
But I've seen something from the big players that I haven't seen before. Like AWS open sourced an agent framework.
Yeah.
And we've seen, and to me, that looks like a signal that they can choke out all the startups nipping at their heels just by throwing some open source scraps, over the fence.
Yeah. Well, why is Anthropic, or why is Amazon building its own LLM? Like that seems like a useless waste of money if they're going to be a backer of OpenAI or a backer of Anthropic, and they want to be the platform that has many different models.
Well, I think I actually know the answer to that question. I mean, that goes back to, that was Bezos's fundamental philosophy of Amazon always was, I guess I call it corporate Darwinism, is that the survival of the fittest, even within your own company. You purposely set up 3 teams to solve the same problem, to basically see which one comes up with the best solution. And maybe whichever ones don't survive, maybe they did something well, and you just kind of pick and choose and you end up with a better solution. I mean, I know for a very long time that was Amazon philosophy. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's just for that reason alone. Or it could be because, Amazon is tightly coupled with governments and they have unique requirements, and this stuff could be coming out with some of those um, programs and opportunities that they want something designed a very specific way. So um, I guess in knowing the way Amazon has operated, I actually don't find that one as unusual as it may seem on the surface. Now, is that an efficient way of running a business? When you look at Amazon's bottom line, where there've been period. I mean, what was it? Was it last year they actually had a quarter where they lost money? So you can easily make the argument that that's not, and it's not. Well, I don't know. Who am I to criticize Amazon with their multi-trillion-dollar market cap? But
I
that's just
just had a really funny thought that Amazon's Nova was like the Amazon basics of LLMs. Like Amazon, like it just kind of came to me, and I was like, "Is this what we're dealing with? We're doing Amazon basics of language models, like That's
you,
kind of
you,
a hilarious concept."
I don't know. Maybe is that I
because it's like it's what you need. It's good enough. It doesn't have any of this branding on it. It's fairy dust, but like if you need an LLM to just do LLM things, it's there. But if you want the thing that maybe will kill you in your sleep, yeah, you can go buy the Anthropic, but we're going to give you the Amazon Basic. Actually, now that pisses me off. They should have named it Amazon Basic LLM. That
Oh wow. Yeah, it's no branding, no logo, no just Amazon Basics LLM. We're laughing about this, but I think I think the probability that this is how they arrived at this is actually pretty high.
yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Just imagine the room that conversation happened. All right, guys, we're gonna spend a couple $100 million, but this to hear me out. Amazon Basics language model edition, and everybody probably was like, "That's genius. Let's do it. Let's go."
And it's like that meme where one guy raised his hand and said, "But actually," and they probably threw him out the window.
Yeah, yeah. I think we solved all the world's problems.
Have we? Have we?
No, I think
You
I
did.
actually have more problems now.
You
And
said something about you said you were going to come back to, and I wrote this note, DC something, and I can't even read it.
oh
What?
yeah,
So we should actually end this on you actually giving people some advice that might actually help them. Which maybe we can't. I don't know. Maybe that's aspiring to that's too aspirational for us.
yeah. Ah man, I have lots of thoughts. Um,
Don't talk about
any
all those.
advice you wanna leave us on? I got something, but I think it might like discredit everything we've already said.
Oh, that
So
sounds amazing. That's definitely what we should go with.
yes. So
So we're going to end the, so that we're going to end this podcast on a. Oh yeah, by the way, everything we said for the last hour, just disregard.
yeah, I it's a newly developed theory. Um, and maybe everybody's already realized it already, and it's taken me a lot longer to get it, which is entirely possible. Which is we read all this content online, and there's a lot of information that is now being produced by AI systems. And if I follow that trend out long enough, I think it's going to become even more and more content is being pumped out by AI systems or AI assisted or AI inspired. And what I keep coming back to is like we're two talking heads on a podcast. There's billions of people on the internet that are posting all sorts of stuff, and there's a lot of people that are posting it super confidently, and maybe even have the pedigree where you might be inclined to believe them. But I would say that the vast majority of content on the line especially around startups, fundraising, products, how to scale, how to do non-scaled things, is actually focused on making you extremely mediocre. And I think that if you want to be an outlier, the only way to be an outlier is to do things different. Now, there are some things you probably shouldn't do differently, like accounting. You should probably not make up your own way of accounting for things. There's some basic ways to communicate.
Uber and Lyft.
A creative accountant is called fraud. That's a terrible dad joke as well. But I really do think that, like, if you want to be an outlier, you want to be unique, you want to bring something world changing and make a dent in this little slice of the universe that we're living in, I think you have to do things different. So if you are relying upon everything you're seeing publicly to drive your product roadmap, to drive how you're talking to people, I'm not saying that all this content's bad, but if you're using that as the sole source of learning and how you should do things and directing yourself, especially in this AI world, like you're playing towards mediocrity. So you got to find places where you can take calculated risks and try to become that outlier. And so that's why I think it might discredit everything we said, because like we only say things that we know. But
I don't think it discredits anything that we've said. I think we've actually been saying. I think everything that we've said has kind of been in support of that thesis. But the problem is, and I've done this many times. There was a time that we were proposing AI to be a decision-making system and decision science and all these very pretty far-reaching, lofty ideas, pretty contrarian thinking. And, we couldn't really find anybody that was willing to take that leap with us, which kind of, that goes to the question that I wanted to ask you, is that despite how, for so long the thinking around being a good investor was contrarian thinking, I have not seen that in any VCs I have talked to in years. I see the exact opposite. I see it all, the epitome of groupthink. They're all looking for the same things. They all think exactly the same way. So these myths, these legends that we hear, these contrarian thinkers that made this big bet on this thing that they thought was going to change the world or that was so different. Uh, I don't see that. If that's happening, I don't see it. And if there are people that think that way, I don't know where they are. And I totally agree with you, though. That's the people that are going to survive this battle royale of mediocrity that we're seeing, where everybody is doing the same thing and trying to be 10% more efficient than the next one. It's somebody that just thinks totally differently, somebody that is a purple cow riding on a wooden roller coaster. But how do you find somebody to go on that wooden roller coaster with you? There's another purple cow.
yeah, it's you got to find someone that believes, and you gotta know how to tell them the right story, and you got to hope that wherever they are in that life of theirs, that they're willing to kind of take that journey with you. Which is why, like, the other bit of advice I would leave people with is just like, the odds of anything happening in life are so small that the odds of a startup being successful are equally, if not even more small. Because like the fact that you and I are even on this call is the result of me meeting you through a friend, and then us ending up at several events together and talking and continuing that conversation, that relationship. A couple of those texts go missed. Maybe we're not talking as much as we are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everything in life is such crazy serendipity, more so than we even ever really think about. And so while that is somewhat disheartening for the success of a startup, it is also empowering, because that means there's an equal chance that things could go in the right direction with everything. So even though you might be thinking, well, why won't it happen? I think there's so many more reasons that you should be thinking about why it can happen.
Yeah, that's something I learned a long time ago from my past life in the music business. Is that's kind of one of the ways I would use to judge people that I met was, where did they attribute their success to? Sure,
Mm,
everybody worked hard. Sure, They put in more hours and they were out there grinding, but it told me a lot when somebody didn't immediately say, boy, we got lucky here, or we knew the right people, or we just got so lucky on the timing. Every time I saw the most successful people that I considered to be the sanest, let's be honest, because the music business was a wacky place with a lot of crazy characters. Um, the ones that I would go, okay, I can have a conversation with this person, with the ones that would go, if you got them in, a private setting and you're just having a conversation person to person, they'd say, we got really lucky. We got really lucky. And the ones that would never admit that, those are the ones that kind of scared me. And I see that a lot in Silicon Valley too, is I see a lot of people that only attribute their success to, I worked harder, I was smarter, when the truth was timing, 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 or they happen to meet the right person once again at the right time. Which I'm glad that you actually look at it from a more optimistic way, because when I say it that way, it sounds extremely fatalistic and pessimistic. But I guess that's the American ethos, is that it could happen to you. I mean, I guess we are proving that it could, because it did happen to these people. Um, Unfortunately, the causation of that, um, that's a little bit harder to guarantee.
Yep. The amount of people that I've met recently that they've done rather well for themselves, they've been successful, that attribute a lot of the success to luck, it's kind of insane. Because you'll sit there and you'll be like, oh, well, you're hardworking and like you are incredibly intelligent and you knew the right space to work in and yada yada yada. And I'm like, yeah, but like at the end of the day, a lot of the crazy stuff that really moves the needle is just like, I was randomly in this place, I was talking to a friend, someone overheard it, they came over, that turned into an investment, that investment turned into this customer converting, and then dominoes started to fall out of nowhere. It's crazy how much luck plays into it. Now you can increase the surface area of your luck by being in the right place, being in the right city, being in the right rooms, going to the right schools. But like at the end of the day, so much of it is luck.
I thought about ending it there, but you know what? Speaking of rooms, because I know this is something that you're doing now.
Yeah.
So many people say, especially when you're here in Silicon Valley, go out to all the events, go to all the events and talk to as many people as possible. And boy, I've done that. I've been there, done that. And if you're in San Francisco, you probably think, I don't really see you at the events anymore. That's because I don't go to them.
Yeah.
Because I was at a pitch event a couple of weeks ago, and it was great. I have no complaints. But the thing I learned is there were about 200 people there, and I think 80% of those people were there promoting their product.
Yeah.
Everybody was building. There's nobody there that's going to be a potential customer, because everybody there they're going to listen to you for 60 seconds while you give your pitch, so that you'll listen to them when they give you their pitch. Now you're no longer in Silicon Valley, you're in Chicago. How does that environment compare there?
Yeah. I events are interesting because if you're a first-time founder, you don't know any better. So for me, I always tried to filter events by, are there investors that I would want to meet and make part of my network and potentially bring on my cap table? Are there potentially customers there, or at least opportunities to spread awareness, either through me talking to people or me demoing? And investors sometimes can fall into that second bucket. And then the third is like, are there people that I can hire there, or people that I'm competing with that I can learn from there? And if none of those three existed, I've started to just say, no, I'm not going to those events.
Yeah.
If two of the three, I usually try to stop by. If it's got all of the three, I'm for sure going and trying to find a way to participate and be visual, because that's where we got a lot of our initial investors. We got a lot of leads to enterprises. But what I can tell you is, if you don't go to those events and they have two of those three, then you never have that opportunity. So whatever you are doing at home better be moving the needle as much as you being out in public. I can't, this is the second time I'm mentioning Arnold Schwarzenegger on this podcast, but like half the job is making the movie and the other half of the job is promoting the movie. And I think it's such a simple lesson. Like I know so many people that just want to code in this place and they're like, I never want to do the marketing. I'm like, if you want to be a founder, you are a living being representing the ethos of the company. You have
it's why I literally wear this t-shirt.
Yeah, it's like you can code in a room all day, sure, but like if you're not making God, which in the context of the AI situations is a whole separate story, but like it's better for you to be out in public meeting people and like promoting the brand. It's than it is for you to code for 2 more hours. Like that's just the nature of the being. That said, there's a lot of really terrible events out there, and there's a lot of time wasters out there. So you got to be clear that like now is the promoting time versus the building time if you are going to go to the events. Now in Chicago, it's a much like smaller tech ecosystem. It's a much weirder tech ecosystem because it's basically you have like the 50-year-old plus IT guys when software was sold on CD-ROMs and floppy disks. And then you don't really have a generation of builders in the in-between because many of them San Francisco, they worked for big tech companies, or they went to New York and they worked in finance. Like Chicago doesn't retain a lot of that tech talent, but you're starting to see some of the big tech companies invest here. And so what I would say is while Chicago isn't as rich in developer events, it makes up for tenfold with bringing the industry in. And so that's what I've started to focus on with the Gen AI Collective versus AI Tinkers that I was pretty involved in as well, is like Gen AI Collective tries to be a little bit broader base in terms of who it's having to the event. So we want the industry professionals alongside the builders, alongside the investors, alongside the startups, alongside the students who just want to learn, or the practitioner, or the AI enthusiast is just trying to make sense of how this works for their business. And I think by having that mix, you have really interesting conversations that happen and a lot more value creation, which I know is not the point for most people, but that's the way that I view it. And that's one of the reasons I kind of left San Francisco. I wasn't a developer. It was really cool for getting some pedigree, meeting some VCs, and it's beautiful there weather-wise. But I felt that the customers for what we were building when we were building for marketing solves were in Chicago, in New York, and in these other markets. Like AI wasn't the thing you were hearing about at every coffee shop that you go to.
Yeah.
So I always tell founders, go where your customers are. You don't have to be in San Francisco to build a world-changing startup unless you're building for developers, in which case I would say probably go there.
And that's kind of exactly what I see at events is everybody's a developer, which means everybody's developing something in the AI space. Which means how do you connect with those people that might be potential users and potential buyers unless you are building a developer tool? But that kind of brings me to, and I'm trying to gauge whether or not this is a me experience or whether you've seen this as well. I do feel like it's changed a little bit. I feel like I used to actually meet VCs at events, and I haven't done that in quite a long time. VCs used to host events at their offices, which they would actually be at. I don't really see that anymore. I also think about Tech Week 2023 versus Tech Week 2024. And for me, they were very different experiences. I met some amazing people in 2023, and I met far fewer people in 2024, and I actually met 0 VCs in Tech Week 2024. I met some interesting people, but not any VCs. And I even had a VC call the week after Tech Week, and I kind of said something along those lines, and he said, "Oh yeah, all the VC meetups were all private and not advertised, so they were all invite only." So my experience is that the events have changed a little bit. Is that because is that a me experience, or do you think who's actually going to these events has changed?
I think who's going to the events has changed. I think we've largely moved from transformative behavior changing type tech, and now we're getting into okay, we got to build all the infrastructure, we got to get sales. I think you had a lot of YC startups focus on AI that were selling to other YC companies, and then like they don't know how to sell out of a paper bag after they get out of it. And then I think what a lot of people realized is that like if in a world where you can conjure up someone else's software in the better part of a day using AI, no one's sharing alpha, no one's going out. So I think that's part of it on like the startup founder side. And then I think on the venture side, like the theme I keep hearing is there's not venture scale opportunities in B2B software anymore. Like I think people are really scared, which I think is so wrong. I think it's so wrong, especially when you consider agents. But I think there's this looming thing of like, what are the venture scale opportunities? Is it only going to be hard tech and defense tech? Are AI agents really going to take off?
Wait. Does somebody actually, are people thinking it's defense tech?
I mean, yeah.
That is, you need to introduce me to
Anduril
people.
is like the number one like
Yeah,
startup that everybody wants to be in.
I don't
SpaceX is
know.
kind of a play on defense tech, if you really think.
I don't know why anybody would think that though, because as somebody who actually used to be the one giving money to those people, I can tell you that is not scalable. That is not going to grow. That is not what it appears to be at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that one absolutely baffles me if VCs think that's the big opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's more like, is B2B SaaS still a thing? Which I think it is. We're just going through this transformation period where we're going to get rid of all the CRUD apps and we're going to replace it with agents.
You know what? I got a story for you. And I think this would be a good place to end on.
Yeah.
So back when I was still in that space, I would go to these, events, these conferences, and there'd be helicopters there and tanks and, missiles. And you would, talk to people that, were actually selling these things at scale for programs. And I went to one of these events, and this is about 10 years ago or so. And, at the time, most of the operations like that in the world were in desert environments, which, there's a very specific type of camo uniform that gets worn in that environment that everybody became familiar with. Think if you watch, think like the show like was it the Homeland? Geez, I can't even remember all these shows. Anyway, everybody knows this, desert environments. And I went to this event, and all of a sudden they had all these camo uniforms that looked back like something you would see from the 70s. They were all green and forest colors. And you go, that's odd. Why are you out here promoting, these uniforms that you would only use in these different environments? And I said this to somebody, and they said, well, this is where the next wars will be fought. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? Has it already been decided? Is there like a schedule of events? Does somebody know like, oh yeah, we're not going to be doing, this stuff in the desert anymore. We're going to be doing it here, and you're going to need this forest colors. And, lo and behold, if you look what's going on in the world right now, the conflict in the world isn't in desert locations anymore, which makes you wonder, how much control do we really have over this stuff? And I think maybe that's the advice that we should give to people is make peace with you have far less control over the situation than you think you do. If you're doing a startup, you're going to need a really big amount of good luck, good timing, meeting the right people at the right time. And if you do happen to be generous, if you do happen to be graced with that generosity, be thankful for it and share that with somebody else along the way. And that's about the best that we can hope for, I think.
Yeah,